the other folks on the line, we're all part of the P1 team here at Children's Hospital. So I'm Brian Dano. I'm one of the psychiatrists who works in the program, and I'll let the rest of our team introduce themselves too.
Hi there, I'm Leanne Mack, psychologist here on the unit.
I am Gigi Hubert, speech language pathologist on the unit.
I'm Courtney Hall, I'm the occupational therapist on the unit.
I'm Allie Thomas, I'm a provincial resource teacher here on the unit.
I'm Jenna, I'm a social worker on the unit.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody for calling in here. How we usually run these meetings is each of the team members from P1, we will all kind of take turns sort of sharing our information and recommendations. And there will be some time to ask questions, of course, as well. What I was imagining is that we would probably do the first kind of 2/3 or 3/4 of this conference with school present. And then, we can review some of the recommendations that are, less relevant to the school towards the end of the conference. So we'll kind of do our pieces, and then maybe Pam and Jackson, if you guys have questions, we can deal with that, and then we'll say goodbye and continue with the other folks, if that's okay. Yeah. So Kyle, Kyle was referred to our program, I think, by you, Dr. Rosenauer, probably late last year or something. And I saw Kyle, I think, in February, and then COVID happened, so everything was kind of put on hold. And thank you to Kirsty and Kyle and Paul and the family just for kind of being patient with us as we're figuring out how to kind of do some of our normal P1 things in the COVID world. So what we ended up doing here is, trying to support Kyle and the family and understand the situation, like over Zoom meetings for, I think, 4 weeks or so. And then we were actually able to bring Kyle in just for 3 days or so last week to do some of the in-person kind of assessments that we were hoping to get done. And Kyle was able to do that, and thanks Kirsty for doing that. I know that was not an easy thing to bring Kyle over for those few days, but I think at the end of this, we feel like, we've been able to sort of understand things with Kyle and, have some new information and diagnoses and everything that do kind of describe some of those challenges, which was, one of the main things that was asked of us. So part of my role here on the team is to share the diagnoses, and I will do that now. So Kyle actually has quite a few diagnoses here, and there's 6 diagnoses that we feel are relevant for him, and several of these are new. So I'll just kind of go over these, and I'll talk a little bit more about the ones that are more kind of specific to me. But one of the new diagnoses is autism spectrum disorder. We have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, as well. We have an unspecified anxiety disorder. There's a language disorder. And then this was identified before Kyle had some testing done in 2019, but he does have learning disorders in reading and written expression. And then we've also diagnosed him with something called developmental coordination disorder. So that's a lot of diagnoses, it's a lot of labels. And I think big picture-wise, what we were able to really appreciate and recognize here with Kyle is there's a lot of areas where he does really struggle with his abilities and his functioning. And Kyle also does a lot of things really well as well. And he is athletic, and he, I think, can be quite socially motivated. And, he's a happy, kind of bright kid who has a lot of interest in everything. But there's a lot of these areas that we were able to kind of appreciate with Kyle where he does struggle. I think that kind of highlights in general that Kyle needs a lot of support, I think, in these different areas. And, part of my job here is to think about the anxiety piece. And I do think that anxiety is a relevant diagnosis for Kyle. Where I'm kind of seeing that most, I think, is in some of these areas where he really struggles. Like, I think he's a kid who wants to do well. He wants to be successful. He wants to perform. He, gets nervous and anxious when he's doing something that's really hard for him. And we're kind of recognizing that a lot of things are naturally quite hard for him. So we're thinking about like social interactions, reading, writing, fine motor tasks, transitioning, using language, just in general, like all of these things are pretty hard for him. And to me, that's where we really see a lot of the anxiety come up. And I do think he's a sensitive kid, and he wants to do well and, just be like his peers and everything. And that's where we see a lot of this anxiety come up when we're kind of pushing him in these areas that are fairly hard for him. I do think the ADHD piece is relevant for him as well. Sometimes it's hard to really tease out, what's focus and impulsive behavior when somebody has autism and they're anxious and so on and so forth. But, to the best of kind of our ability here based on information from you, Leanne, and from myself and observations and the available information we have from other sources, I do think that's an area of challenge as well for Kyle, and an area where he'll benefit from some support. When it comes to the pieces around autism and the language and the coordination issues, I'll let my team members who made those diagnoses kind of share more. But when it comes to the autism, that wasn't my initial sense with Kyle. The first time I met him, it was just for a few minutes. He seemed like a superficially kind of social kid and, good kind of expressions. And, I don't expect much of a 9-year-old over Zoom to chat with me a lot. But, as we got to kind of understand things a little bit more with him, we certainly did see he struggled socially. And I think kind of, small talk or like social conversation is quite challenging for him. And things that are a bit more abstract or emotional are also quite challenging for him. He struggles a lot with transitions, with unexpected changes. And there's some sensory differences there with him. So, we consider everything, of course, when we're looking at autism, but Dr. Mack did a very careful assessment. And, overall, we felt that, his symptoms and challenges did meet the criteria there. So it'll be really important for him to get some intervention and some support in all of these areas, I think. And I think, of course, includes school. So I'll let Ms. Thomas and the team speak a bit more about that specifically. I think I had some thoughts around the medications and, other interventions to support Kyle. Maybe I'll hold off on those a little bit for now until, we have the chance to review things a bit more at the end of the conference. And, so I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll pass things over to Dr. Mack.
Thanks. So my involvement was really kind of two-part. The main piece was around the diagnostic assessments, particularly around ASD. And then the second piece I did mostly over Zoom was kind of a social emotional assessment. And in fact, we started off with that, and then he came in person. So saw him on 4 occasions by Zoom. He was relatively engaged. I mean, parents were really working hard to get him sort of to the screen, and he completed a few tasks, one of which was the projective drawings as well. And then he came in person, as Dr. Bava mentioned, last week, and we did the ADOS, which is a structured interview, and parents completed the ADR, which is the interview portion of it. I felt that during my sort of in-person meet with him, I kind of got a cross-section of Kyle. And what I meant by that was sort of he came in slightly anxious, but kind of settled pretty easily and quickly, and then engaged in the tasks for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then kind of became distractible and impulsive. And then when we were doing some of the tasks that were more verbal, meaning asking questions and that kind of thing, that's when I started seeing him kind of refuse and become slightly dysregulated, at which point he sort of showed some of the behaviors that I've heard through mom and dad, and he sort of did the gestures and kind of wanted to throw a toy at me, and later did, that sort of thing. We had multiple breaks in there. After lunch, we continued with the ADOS, and by then he sort of relaxed and kind of was chit-chatty and really was much more engaged. And he brought some of his kind of preferred tasks, like Uno and that sort of thing. And I was through that, I was able to get him to complete some of those verbal tasks. So, overall, I think he worked really hard on that, and it was helpful to have him in person. So kind of based on both the ADOS and the ADIR formal testing, He does meet criteria for autism spectrum disorder, which essentially means he's demonstrating persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. I also got a chance to also do some school collateral. He's also showing some restricted repetitive behaviors as well. And what I really noticed is just sort of that lack of back and forth. I think all of us saw that superficial kind of conversation, very little imaginative play. He, I think, relies a lot on others to lead, or often uses a lot of scripts or lots of imitation. And that was kind of both from parents' perspective, but also kind of what I saw too. Like, he would copy in my play. It was really hard for him to kind of join. There's this real difficulty with kind of relating and understanding, I think, others as well. In terms of some of the nonverbal communication, he does engage in eye contact. I think in some ways that's kind of fooling some folks, but it's actually not modulated. So meaning he really can stare intently, and I think he's trying to understand and process, but it's really just staring, as opposed to kind of looking away and looking back and kind of like reading the space in the room. And that's what I mean by sort of that eye contact. And there's kind of minimal range of facial expression. Mom and dad also had a chance to really tell me kind of what that looks like even when he was little. In terms of the kind of the restrictive repetitive behaviors, I really saw that kind of perseveration and kind of that stuckness. In fact, in one of the tasks, I had to demonstrate and kind of use my own gestures, and he was really kind of stuck on one of like my index finger and what it was doing, and was kind of perseverating on that. And he also tends to engage in kind of ritualistic behaviors, kind of more so at home, but I can see that as being part of that rigidity as well within ASD. If I kind of flip over to the social emotional piece now too, what the findings kind of suggest, it was mostly through the drawings and kind of a sentence completion task, is that he's experiencing lots of stress, and probably has few resources to manage his stress. And that really probably is an accumulation of various things, as Dr. Banner kind of already explained, kind of in that frame of anxiety, like probably difficulty in reading, the social situation, or struggles with math, or not math, or reading, and that sort of thing. I think those are accumulated stressors for him. The drawings also really kind of, and his answers also fit with ASD in terms of he's really a here and now kind of kid. He really lacks kind of insight into his behaviors and actions, and he struggles with anything that's kind of more relational, or kind of understanding a relationship, or anything with emotional content. So kind of like you do something like, what's he worried about, or what makes him feel scared. It's really hard for him to kind of answer those types of questions. Parents also complete a number of measures during our time together, and all the symptoms really are consistent with ADHD and specified anxiety. Recommendation-wise, the main thing I think would be really helpful would be skills training in kind of helping Kyle develop emotional awareness, and maybe using a more mindfulness approach to that. A lot of the more recent research I came across has looked at kind of that mindfulness approach for helping kids with ASD with emotional dysregulation. So if there's room or someone to do that with him, I think that would be a real good starting point for him. I'll move you on to Gigi Hubert and take questions later.
All right, thanks, Dr. Mack.
Thank you.
So I got to work with Kyle, and I have to say, his parents, both of them, Kirsty and Paul, worked really hard, and Kyle worked really hard. He completed 2 full language assessments with me. And given that it is an area of difficulty for him, it was pretty impressive. So a lot of gratitude to the family of interrupting all the days and times to get him to do things he does not want to do. So yeah, overall, his language is, it falls in the 5th percentile if I just take all the different subtests. When we want to put the language together, like into like stories and narration, it falls significantly below that, more like below the 1st percentile. So it is a very, even though I think he's great at copying sentences or saying things in sentences, and so it kind of might not be as obvious when you kind of break things down and look at the discrete skills. It really shows how these areas of difficulty for him. So he definitely benefited from having time to process new information, places, and transitions. Is okay to keep, I guess, I'm like, keep on talking if Kyle's in the room, but
My daughter just got home.
okay.
It's okay. Kyle's at grandma's.
Okay, great. So one thing is, I did notice that when I talk about him needing time, you know, he might say no or negate quite a bit, but I noticed that if he's got a lot of time, and I mean like even like the next day, introduce something and a little bit of exposure and assurances, he was more willing to try the new activity or to check something else or to kind of go outside of his comfort zone. So I'm definitely, and I think Ms. Thomas will talk about this too, the environmental supports would include visual aids and organizers, providing information just redundantly. I say this, but I also have the caveat of one thing I noticed with him is that if you give pictures and auditory information and expect him to kind of take in the visual and the auditory, it's a little too much for him. So I want to do one and the other and not expect to have both happen at the same time. So definitely the kind of the visual distractions, parts about like where the autism go with like that shared imagination, helping him to practice, develop that perspective taking and problem solving and conversational skills. So that's the thing. I think he's a friendly kid. He smiles. I was Kirsty yesterday when he came in. I mean, wow, he smiles at beams, and it just makes all of us so happy. And so he is friendly. So it doesn't mean that he's not, but that reciprocal conversation is really hard for him, right? Like that back and staying in the same kind of topic together and have that shared experience is a little more challenging for him. On the testing, I just want to go to where 1-step direction, 1 and 2-step auditory directions, where is pretty much his max. If we threw in things that had to do with sequencing, like first touch this, then do that, that was really challenging. Sequencing is very challenging for him. And this is true for narration as well. So even when I gave him 5 pictures to tell me a story based on each pictures, he labeled the pictures, and then he still was able to get the sequencing out of order. So then he went back, he kind of told a story, and then he went back and talked about something that was kind of out of sequence. So that's just one area that I think is really important that we work on with him. And the other part is that when I do a little bit of I read a little tiny story, like 2 to 3 sentences long, he might like attach himself to 2 or 3 words that he's very familiar with. And then that's his focus, right? So we think we've talked about one thing, like my example yesterday was we think we're talking about kids in a museum, but he's actually thinking about fishing and using a fishing pole and what that's like. And there's, and so that checking for understanding is so important with him because so often I think that he might be really thinking about something different than we assume.
Yep.
So I want to make sure, yeah. And then what I noticed, so like the 1 or 2 steps was hard, but even like with physical routine type activities, it was still hard for him to follow like 4 to 5 steps. It was much easier if it was just turn the dice over, do this, like those kind of manual as well, not just auditory directions. He still would skip. So really asking him to hold a lot of information and to follow directions is going to be hard for him, right? So we want to just give him that kind of support. And again, back to the like recommendations, again, that let's like just checking for that understanding, also that less verbal language. I think it's great to model a lot of language and humor and things like that. So I'm not saying take that away, but when we're really wanting to teach him a new information or new concepts or have him follow directions, less is more with him. He's also very literal. And so any kind of abstract statements, we want to make sure we kind of couple it with the actual meaning of what our message really is, so he can follow that. And I think he can, he memorizes statements pretty well. So I think he can do that after a while, but just so we know that he's understanding where we are. So I'm definitely recommending, I mean, I know he's going to have a lot of things happen right now, like we talked about, there's a lot of diagnoses to address, but you know, if there is speech pathologist in the schools, because he needs help in, you know, word structure, like in morphemes, word classes, how do I associate and categorize words so they're easy for me to recall. He also had difficulty with recalling words as well. Syntax, all of those things when it comes to language. I think it would be great to have like kind of the standard speech language pathologist to help with, but also that, again, that social thinking, that perspective taking. So that's why I get into like the role playing and the shared imaginations, and just practicing on how to relate to others in the world. And social stories are another good example of how to just help him. I have to say, I talk about social stories a lot, and lately my kind of kick is to not just use it to navigate through tough situations, but also to remind him what went well. So like, oh yeah, I just noticed that when I did this, I got what I wanted, or this is how, you know, so just to remind, like reinforce positive as well. You could use social stories for, I think it's really helpful. Like, hey, when I come to my desk and sit down and wait for my teacher to say something, I notice that, you know, I'm not getting yelled at. Something, I'm doing that very superficially, but anyway, that's just another recommendation. So I think that's, yeah, what I really want to say for now, and I'll pass it on to Courtney.
Thank you.
Hi. Oh, did you have a comment?
Just thank you.
So I also had the pleasure of seeing Kyle in person, but I did meet with Kirsty and Paul and had them complete a couple questionnaires ahead of time. So they completed questionnaires regarding Kyle's sensory processing, as well as the DCDQ, the Developmental Coordination Disorder Questionnaire, which just kind of cued me to dig a little deeper into his gross and fine motor skills. So regarding Kyle's sensory processing, what came from that questionnaire and then from like discussion with the team and with Kirsty and Paul is just that Kyle is quite impacted by his sensory processing. So there's at times he might seek out sensory input, and that's primarily movement. He's also sensitive to sensory input at times, and he's going to attempt to avoid sensory input, especially if he perceives it to be uncomfortable or challenging. He also misses some cues from his environment. And we've heard of this from Gigi and Dr. Mack, but kind of those verbal prompts, reminders, social and nonverbal cues. But he also misses misses cues from his own body. So such as hunger cues, his need to use the bathroom, and then kind of that emerging emotional dysregulation. So I don't think he's very aware of when he's starting to feel frustrated or agitated or annoyed. So kind of those, to pair it out in zones of regulation language, kind of those yellow zone feelings. He's kind of just either green or red. So from the DCDQ, it showed that while he does really well with those gross motor skills and activities, that his fine motor skills was an area that he really struggles with, particularly printing. So I did have him do the movement ABC as well as the Beery VMI. So it did show that he struggles with his fine motor, and most specifically those pen to paper tasks. So that is an area that's hard with him, and so he meets the criteria for developmental coordination disorder. And so when we think about kind of printing through that developmental coordination lens, printing is really one of those tasks where he's continually interpreting feedback about the movements of his hand while also having to plan the next movements, and then while thinking about what having to write next. So when you kind of put that language piece on there, we can see how this is an area that is hard for him, and he knows it's hard for him. So we're going to kind of get that avoidance behavior that we're seeing a little bit with those type of activities or academic demands being placed on him. Overall, his gross motor skills were within that normal range. The only one thing I did notice is that he has a harder time when he's having to slow down and be really precise with his movements. So that example was having to walk along a line in a controlled fashion, heel to toe. He had a harder time with that. There could have been an attention piece at play there, but how he did seem focused on the task when we were doing it, but that is just one area that I think he does really well at being fast at, but when he has to be slow and in control, it's just a little bit harder for him, or he doesn't like to do it as much because it's more fun to kind of get a lot of that movement. From the Beery VMI, his visual motor integration skills were on the lower range, as was his motor coordination. So that kind of just showed me that the visual perception skills seemed to be more intact. However, it was more just that the motor actions of printing was a harder area for him. So when we think about written output skills, I think it's definitely going to be a balance of, we want to build on those skills, but stretch his tolerance of working on something that's a bit trickier for him, or that he wants to avoid. So I think he will benefit from a 10-finger typing program kind of sooner rather than later, just so he can learn appropriate typing skills. He might also be a good candidate for voice to text, but then we definitely want him to continue working on his functional writing skills. But you know, as academic demands get larger, he might benefit more from those strategies. The Can Child website is a great website for supporting individuals with developmental coordination disorder. Jumping back to kind of his self-regulation and whatnot, some key points that we learned as a team, and from speaking with Kirsty and Paul, and Mrs. Thomas and I are in the process of kind of creating a regulation plan for Kyle, but we're meeting with Kirsty and Paul next week to kind of finalize it, and then with their permission, we'll pass it on to the rest of the team. But some key points that we learned is he does really regulate through movement, and he regulates through relationships, and that it's really helpful to think about the majority of his behaviors as stress behaviors, as opposed to kind of those misbehaviors. And one example, just quickly I'll give, is when he was doing the one, the Beery, the VMI portion of it, you know, he started doing it, it started to get hard, and he just broke the pencil. So I kind of said, oh, it looks like it's time to take a break. You know, I didn't give him the reaction of the broken pencil. And he was like, no, I can do it. I just need another pencil. So I gave him another pencil. He broke the pencil again. And then, you know, I kind of framed it as, let's take a break. He might have broken one more pencil. I can't remember the timeline. But then on our way out, either myself or GGQ, that he hadn't gone to the bathroom in a few hours. And he went to the bathroom. But I think it's definitely something to keep in mind that, you know, he needed to take a break. He wasn't aware of that and needed that cue to kind of move forward with that. I know Mrs. Thomas is going to stress some of these other things, but just, and I know Gigi has already mentioned it, but the use of those visuals, that time and space to process demands, that structure and consistency to his day, and then just making sure he really does have those proactive scheduled sensory breaks at those natural break times at school, in the school routine, especially to down regulate. You know, coming in at times, he may really need a clear routine, or he might need a job so that he can focus on that and kind of be, you know, a helper or something like that, kind of using Sarah Ward language there with just giving him a role to do. I think that's my bit, so I'll pass it along to Mrs. Thomas.
Hey guys. I had the pleasure of connecting with both Kirsty and Paul and learning about how Kyle's been doing in a school's perspective from their lens, but also so appreciative of you guys, Jackson and Pam, your collaboration in helping me understand how Kyle's been doing in your setting in previous years as well. Really helpful for our team to get a sense of what things are looking like in a more naturalistic setting. I also did get to meet with Kyle last week while he was here, and I felt like I got the luckiest job because I got to be the fun one. I wasn't doing any standardized assessment, but I was assessing him informally in terms of what I wanted to get a sense of is what does he identify as things that he feels good about and that we can really use in the school setting to increase his motivation. And he said he really is liking his new teacher, which is great news. In terms of in the school setting, he really prides himself on his athletic skills, loves that gross motor movement. An interesting thing that he brought up individually or independently, which I didn't know the context at the time, is that he likes to fix things. And I said, you know, Kyle, like, you know, that's amazing that you like to fix things. And we were talking about things he likes to fix. And I said, you know, once I had this student who would break things just so that he could fix them again. And he really like thought about that. And he said, but you can't break a broken pencil. And now this was 2 hours after the appointment he had with Courtney, where he experienced such frustration and was breaking pencils. And that example really highlighted for me a lot about Kyle and a lot about how he's processing emotions. It probably takes him a lot longer to think through these really challenging situations that he's experiencing, and only maybe 2 hours later is ready to have the conversation around repair. And just by fluke in that moment, I said, well, you know, let's brainstorm the ways we could fix a broken pencil and use that as kind of a concrete example for him that we can repair things that we break. So that was great. We moved on to looking at his emotional regulation. I did a simple 5-point scale assessment with him just to see how he could express what he feels in his body. When he's calm, what does calm feel like? What are strategies that, you know, help you to feel calm? And he was able to answer in quite a concrete way for calm, that his body's relaxed, feeling good, that kind of thing. And he was also able to give some pretty concrete examples of how his body feels when he's out of control. Anger, tense muscles. He talked about his facial expression. But when you had him try to do the in-betweens, he had really little insight into those in-between emotions. What does frustration feel like in your body? What does it feel like when you're kind of restless or having a hard time paying attention? Those are the pieces that he really struggled with. So in the school setting, I think that helps us really understand where we want to target the work for him. Is you know, modeling ourselves doing check-ins, seeing peers think about how their body feels, using some of those universal social emotional learning programs within the school setting. And I know, Jackson, you do this already. But he really would benefit from some targeted modeling and practice doing check-ins, not just calm versus angry, but those feelings in between. Again, like Courtney said, also checking in with his body and just cueing him to take a moment to think, you know, what does your body feel like right now? And some of the mind up tools would be really great in the classroom setting too. The other area that I looked at was his social awareness, and it really struck me, Jackson, when we spoke about his social relationships in the school context, and how sometimes it feels like he can be saying something that is the exact right thing to say to the right peer to make that person explode. And how do we understand that in the context of a kid that we know doesn't have great social insight? And I got to see this a little bit because he, firstly, when he's trying to connect with me, I was actually surprised at how he's able to ask questions. He asked questions about me, but the reciprocity wasn't there. So he couldn't continue the conversation. And then when we think about, you know, in a peer context, he's not making the connection necessarily of how other peers feel about what he's saying, but he has some really good scripted language, and it just takes one time for that scripted language to get a big reaction for him to be able to have that cause and effect connection. But the deeper understanding isn't there, and he probably isn't processing it until much later, whatever the conflict is that arose. We really want to help slow things down for him, coach him in the moment. I think some of the social thinking kind of resources within the school context could be super helpful. And the last area I looked at just like very informally was his reading, because we know he's got identified disabilities in reading and writing. I just think that it's really helpful to have the information of our speech and language assessment and the the motor assessment to understand those learning disabilities a bit deeper, to say, oh, there's some core language challenges that help us understand why the reading hasn't progressed the way we'd like it to, as well as the frustration he's feeling with fine motor is huge as well. When I talked to Kyle about reading, he said he likes reading one-on-one. He's really liking reading with Kirsty at home. It's a very difficult thing for him to do with other people, or if there's other kids around him. So my big ask would be, could we find someone to do one-to-one reading with Kyle? And it might not get to the reading for a little while because we want to focus on building a relationship where he feels safe, and that vulnerability is okay. You know, if he's reading with somebody that can say, you know, reading was hard for me too, that's amazing. And yeah, so preferably, I think it would be great if we could do that in a school setting, because he's a kid that experiences a lot of cognitive fatigue. He's dealing with a lot of stressors throughout a school day. But if we had to do it as tutoring, to find options to make that happen as well. There is a regulation plan we're working on, and we'll share it with Kirsty and Paul on Monday, and just strongly encourage you guys to share it with the school as well, because the more we're consistent in using the same strategies to regulate him and to teach him that there are certain tools that really help him when he's in that yellow zone, and then there's certain tools that help when he's in the red zone, and we want to have everybody being consistent with that.
Ellie, I was going to interrupt really quickly with the 5-point scale, because I kind of forgot to talk about this when Courtney and I were out in the playground, and we were talking about, I was just, bringing up, like, how do you feel right now? And I know that teacher has talked about it, because he knew about the 5-point scale, and he knew about, he was trying to explain it. He called it 1 to 5 or 5 to 1 or something. He was trying to tell us. And it just, to me, I think it's a little abstract for him. So the more concrete we can get, like even the word relaxed, he might not really associate what is relaxed yet, like what Ali was saying and Courtney were saying, like that, knowing what that even is. So maybe, at the time I was like, let's talk about animals, and kind of used animals, but then we went off to a different topic a little bit. But so just making sure that it's really concrete, because one, just even sequencing 1 to 5, I'm not sure if it's hard for him to grasp that in a, I don't know.
I do this one. You're either feeling like that's like,
Yeah.
he seems to get.
Yeah.
Because
So just like what you're saying, like working on those little pieces too. But I just kind of wanted to just kind of throw that out there too, that it is a little bit abstract. I think it's great to keep using it, but the more concrete examples you can use within each of those categories, I think will be helpful.
Visual, I think, would be really helpful. Like, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to everybody there. I think what we'll do now is maybe just ask if there's any questions from the school team there.
I don't have any questions at the moment. I don't know about you, Jackson.
Do you need a tincture, Maya?
I think I wanted to share a couple.
Can you please eat something other than a granola bar?
Today, because
do you want me to make you something?
Week, so it was coming back on Tuesday. It was a bit. It was so good to have him back, and he was glad that we were happy to have him back. But he's trying really hard to make connections, and today was really huge for him with me because. There was an incident with one of the students, and he's been watching a student be extremely abrasive and disrespectful, targeting to me, and he's really watching that. And so today I talked about what it feels like when people talk to you that way, and that it's hurtful and stuff. And I came back to my desk, and he looked at me and he said, "Miss B, if it wasn't COVID, I'd give you the biggest hug to make you feel better." And I thought, that's huge, because he had empathy, and he wanted to make me feel better because of that, and he saw that was hurtful. I think that was huge, because trying to make those connections, those emotional connections with Kyle, I think are going to be key in helping him, so that when I do sit down with him to help him with reading, he's going to trust. It's building that trust with him.
That's huge.
So that was really, for me, that was huge.
That's huge. That's very huge. That's good.
It's fantastic. And one thing I noticed too is that when I was like, stories are really hard for him. I don't do any reading, but I was like, we're gonna do some stories. He would just vocalize like, like we're not doing this. And if we respond to that really quickly and get him back into something comfort, and then introduce, so I found that was actually really helpful too. And then eventually we got through it, but yeah, so when he senses this is a hard thing, like you're saying, the reading, but that is so sweet about the having that sympathy for you and knowing like that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to add, actually, I think what really helped there, that's a really nice example, Jackson. I think what helped there was that you were really explicit. So rather than relying on him just simply watching, the fact that you had verbalized, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and actually saying it out loud, I think that was probably the missing link, so to speak, of what he needed to hear for him to then know how to react, let's say, appropriately. But if we relied solely on just him observing,
Come here,
that
Maya. I
interaction
can't talk to you when you're
and
over
maybe
there.
guessing what you might have felt, it's not going to be as clear. So I think it's really nice that you did that.
You haven't eaten anything, and I'm not leaving till 25 past. I won't make you late. I'm not leaving early. I'm on a Zoom call with 6 doctors.
I'm really looking forward to the regulation plan. I think that will be really helpful. We haven't gone into any formal reading. I did do an assessment on him, and we've got some really prescriptive reading strategies that we're going to do. His fine motor right now is he's doing well with that, copying off the board into a journal, finishing a sentence. Today he had to write, October is a fun month. My favorite thing is, and finish it. And kids were writing Halloween, Thanksgiving. He said sorting candy, and then explained why sorting candy was so important to him, right? And he drew a beautiful picture and colored it. And so a lot of these things he was so reluctant to do last year, he's willing to do. So is it a honeymoon period? I don't know, but whatever it is, we're celebrating these huge things for him. And, he's getting lots of goals and points. It's a big token economy right now. He really is into that. And owning his behavior and goals. Today he didn't take a goal for respect at some point because he blurted out and talked over a couple of kids during their talking time. So I'm seeing little tiny pieces where there is, we can build on that, and that's huge. And just letting him know, I saw that. That's incredible what you just did, and then labeling it for him. And then he just sits there and he's got this, the response is really positive. So again, it's all about relationship with him and with all the kids, but with him specifically. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really great news. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, sometimes it's nice to hear what's going on, and where he's at every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jackson, just before we go, our program, and we offer post-discharge support. With parents' consent, you're welcome to reach out to me. And as you get our reports, or if you guys are working on the
just give me
IEP
4
and
more
have
minutes, okay?
questions, please feel free to
Please,
connect.
I won't make you late, I
Excellent.
promise.
Thanks, Ellie.
Yeah, and we'll have reports that will come out, and we'll share those with parents and encourage them to be shared with school as well.
Yeah, I think for Kyle this year, this is a good placement for him. Moving forward in the spring to see where he's going to launch next year, we'll we can talk about. But I think right now it's so focuses on the social emotional, and then having 7 students to a teacher and an EA, he's going to get so much support with the academics. So I think that I think he's in a good place for all of that, and then we'll be able to implement a lot of these recommendations because of the nature of the class. So I think it's going to meet a lot of the needs that he has.
I agree.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, if there aren't any more questions from school, I think for now we'll say goodbye to you guys, and thanks so much for attending. And I was glad to hear that things are off to a good start so far this year.
Really good. I want to thank all of you. It's so nice to put a face to the person. You know, I get reports from you guys. I get calls. Dr. Rosenauer, I've heard so much about. I've never seen you. Hi. Anyways, thank you for all that you do. You make such a difference in these children's lives. So I just wanted to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Okay, yeah. And Kirsty, just want to make sure it's kind of okay to talk about some of the more non-school specific stuff.
It is. My daughter does need to go to dance. If you didn't see the bun being put in the hair, so
Yes, we did.
I don't know whether it's best for me to call in. I can take my computer, and you'll just have to sit on the passenger seat, and I just won't look at you. She's fine to hear anything. She's fine. Kyle won't be with me, but I do have to take her to dance. She does not like being late.
Yeah, I might suggest the phone might be a better option, especially in the car. I don't want to distract you.
Yeah, no, I won't look at the.
Or something. Yeah.
Jenna, would you be able to send me a phone link?